in order to have some kind of consciousness, a system needs to be aware of its thoughts, which means there are at least 4 things that are required: system, thoughts, short-term memory to inspect past thoughts via current ones, and self-concept. All right, let's try to see what has consciousness and what doesn't at various levels. All animals are systems. Check. Okay, system is good. All animals with advanced nervous systems likely have thoughts. We have no reason to suspect they don't. They certainly behave like they have thoughts. Dogs seem to dream. So, let's say like cows and babies and above, cows in evolutionary trend of complexity and babies in a developmental trend of complexity on their way towards adults. Let's say they have thoughts and are systems. Okay, we got 2 out of 4 checked. The next ranking is on how much short-term memory the system has. And it's not just do you have short-term memory or not. In order to be conscious at all, you have to have some. But what I'm saying here is once the minimum conditions are met to check the green boxes of consciousness, like, oh, you're conscious, there is a spectrum of how conscious you are and how conscious any entity really is that we're describing. Short-term memory. Smarter animals have more than dumber ones. Your goldfish may have almost no memory. Your dog can remember that one time you yelled at it 2 years ago and it finally kills you when you're at your weakest. I don't know. Older children definitely have more short-term memory than younger children. Sober people have more short-term memory than drunk people, that's for sure. So it's possible to be conscious. Yes, you are aware of past mental states, but more or less depending on, at least, how much of your recent memory you can inspect and how clear that memory is and how deeply you can inspect it. Because if you cannot inspect your memories very clearly or very deeply, you're not as conscious as if you have unbelievably like videographic recollection of what had happened just a second ago. And you can replay it and really inspect it and see how you behaved and see how the other person behaved. It's a grandiose level of consciousness. And then all the way down to like someone who's really drunk but not quite unconscious yet. I don't know, there's not a whole lot of inspecting going on. Just a whole lot of outstream, not a whole lot of processing. You can also rank consciousness systems or conscious systems on how detailed the self-concept is. How much self-concept do animals have? That's really tough to figure out. I'm sure somebody can comment that's studied this issue before and let us know what degree of self-concept animals have. It's very, very difficult to figure out, short of brain scanning and being able to understand the brain. But we know a couple other things. We know that older children have a more detailed self-concept than younger children. They can tell you more about themselves. They're more introspective. They can tell you deeper insights about themselves. They're very much aware of the fact that there's a self. Younger children, at some age of children, are not aware that they are human beings or anything like that. Sober people have a more detailed self-concept than drunk people. For example, drunk people do all kinds of wacky stuff because they, quote, lose themselves in the moment, which is reduced self-concept. People will also say like, oh, you're being so self-conscious. Have a beer. Reduce consciousness, reduce self-concept, and now you're jamming and you're having fun. Right? Too conscious. When you are yelling, when you're drunk, because it feels good to express raw emotion, and that's why you're doing it, you forgot that you have a self-concept and that there are other individuals in this world and they could be sleeping. But when you're drunk enough, it can really feel like you are the only person in the world. And you're not even a person. You're just having fun. Fun is being had. And you don't even reflect on the fact that you're having it. In a sense, very freeing, which is why people drink, but also degradatory in the short term towards your ability to accurately perceive the world at a deep level of abstraction. So it's possible to be more or less conscious, and definitely conscious, but more or less, depending on how self-aware you are versus living in the moment. For example, somebody, even linguistically, we get tipped off to this definition. Are you conscious of the fact that you're pissing Sally off with your jokes? Like, whoa. So when my jokes come out of my head, before that, I have to inspect them on their way out? That means I concede that I come up with jokes and then they stay in short-term memory where I inspect them. And then I make the decision, self-concept, to release them or not, depending on if Sally's around, what kind of bad mood Sally's in today. And self-consciousness, same thing. Consciousness can also be higher or lower depending on how complex your self-concept is. For example, how are you being perceived by others? Where is my life trajectory going? How do I see myself evolving in the future? How do I fit in my social group, et cetera, et cetera? There are people that think very short term. Like, I'm hungry, I eat. I want to have sex with something, I have sex with it. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to deal these drugs, sling these rocks, I'm going to do that shit. And then you get arrested by the police and they're like, do you understand that what you were doing is bad for everyone around you and it's going to land you in jail? And they might legitimately be like, no, I just never thought of that. Because they're not as conscious as people who have a lot of consciousness, really think through how their individual actions are going to affect everything around them because they operate at a higher level of abstraction. Maybe just for that moment, maybe all the time. So consciousness is a spectrum. If a system has short-term memory and self-concept, we can consider it conscious, but the spectrum is really large above those minima. And some entities, thus, can be way more conscious than others. For example, less evolved animals versus more evolved animals. Yeah, in some sense, a cow might have consciousness, maybe, but a chimp probably has more consciousness, and a human definitely more consciousness. Less versus more grown-up children. As children grow up, they develop more of a consciousness. They are damn near unconscious when they're born, and though they are awake in the technical sense, there's nothing in there maybe that's awake. It's all just systems and subsystems, no analysis, no parsing, no abstracted level of this is me and I'm here. As a matter of fact, during child development, there are predictable stages of brain development that correspond to predictable stages of psychological functioning where children first illustrate that they have a self-concept. They don't always have one, and I think young toddlers typically don't. And then as they get to age, God knows what, I pull that out of my ass for sure, they start to realize like, I'm a person and what I do can matter and it can hurt people's feelings. I have a moral agency that I'm supposed to do right things versus wrong things. I'm not just a video game character. Less insightful and attentive adults can technically be less conscious than more insightful and attentive adults. Somebody who has been practicing Buddhism and meditation and a ton of self-inspection can be more conscious in most moments, for example, than someone who just kind of lives life and no big deal. And of course, less and more inebriated adults can be less and more conscious.